Hello, friends, and welcome, welcome, welcome to XGen. This is week 1 of our study and sermon series that we are calling XGen, where we will explore and dig deeper into this call that we have as Christians to live together in an intergenerational faith community. Amen. I'm so glad that you are joining us through a small group or on Sunday morning or just on our social media. And I hope that you will stick with us through these next weeks as we explore what it means to be an intergenerational community. Because we know that that's what God calls us to do. Amen. But how many of you have found yourselves ever saying something like, ooh, these kids today, they're a different breed, or your generation is just different than ours? Or how many of you have found yourselves frustratedly exclaiming, oh, boomers, or oh, millennials, what are we supposed to do with them? The differences in generations are real, and we are all familiar with the frustration that can happen when we try to get all of ourselves together in one space or moving in one direction. And the familiar tropes and jokes and easy scapegoating that we all do happens often between generations. When millennials say, well, if the baby boomers hadn't ruined the environment, or our elders say, well, if you millennials just would work harder, or if you didn't need affirmation or congratulation every 5 minutes, right? We've all heard it. We've all heard it. But we also hear, as followers of Christ, we also hear the call of God that says that faithful people are supposed to bless the generations that come after us. God calls us in the word to receive from the ancestors wisdom, guidance, encouragement, legacy, and to pass it on to those who come after. You'll read about it in your small groups this week. In Psalm 78, the psalmist says, I will open my mouth and I will speak of the mysteries, the wisdom of old. I will not hide it. We will not hide it from our descendants, but we will tell the next generation all about the praise that is due to the Lord and all about God's strength. This idea of blessing the next generation, this idea of being a steward of the mysteries of God, receiving from those who came before us and passing it on to those who will come after us, it's all over in the Bible. And in these next 6 weeks, we're going to call that idea, that act of receiving from those before us and passing on to those who come after it, we want to call that ancestor work. Ancestor work. That's a concept that I am taking from Pastor Raul Echevarria, who we are so glad to have on our team, but hang on to that phrase. Hold it in your heart for a minute. Ancestor work. And that command to receive and to pass on generationally, to think about not just our own lives, but about those who have come before and those who will come after. That is a command that God gives us that is throughout the Bible, all over our holy text. When God in the Torah gives the people the law to live by, God says, take the commands and write them on your doorposts and tie them around your wrists and on your forehead and teach them to your children. Talk about them when you are walking out on the street. And through the prophets and the psalmists and the teachings of Jesus, we continuously hear this commandment to bless the children, to bless those who are coming after us, to share God's blessing and the teachings of our God. Even Peter in the book of Acts, when he's talking to the gathered people, reminds us that God's promise is for you and for your children and for all those who are far off, everyone that God will gather across generations. And we only know about those passages of hope because those who came before us were doing their ancestor work, because of their faith to share the story, to write down the word, to invite the next generation in. We know the promise of God. And so as we think about this idea of ancestor work, I'm reminded of a line from my favorite poet, Detroit-based poet, Jessica Care-Moore. She says, "You are just an ancestor with skin on." You are just an ancestor with skin on. So often, friends, we think about the ancestors and we think about those who came long before us, and we remember them as these huge figures of greatness, whether they're great grandparents who made courageous journeys of immigration, or great great grandparents who survived the scourge of slavery so we could be here today. Or sometimes we remember ancestors that were national figures who have affected all of our lives collectively. We remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or Rosa Parks or Fannie Lou Hamer or Marsha P. Johnson when we talk about ancestors, but we also must remember, according to the way our God has ordered life, we too are ancestors. We all will be ancestors to someone. And those who came before us, they were just doing their best to make faithful and courageous choices. And that work, that ancestor work, that's the same thing we're called to do. Our best to make faithful and courageous choices, to think about how our actions will impact generations that we may never see on this side of the veil. So let's take that into our hearts for a minute. How would it change the way you make choices if you asked yourself, what kind of ancestor work am I doing? How would it change the things you prioritize if you were prioritizing them by thinking of how they would bless the generations to come? How would it change the way that we gather together as a church? The things that we do, what if we always asked ourselves, is this the ancestor work God is calling us to do? How will this ministry bless the generations to come? How are we investing in future generations? That ancestor work. It is the gift that we have received from those who have gone before us, the legacy of our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents of our ancestors in faith. They have handed it on to us, to you, God's faithful child, so that now you and I And we together can make our choices, can move with courage, can choose decisively to live in ways that bless those who will come next. I hope you will take that idea into your heart and mind and turn it over and wrestle with it and think about it in the coming 6 weeks. And as you gather in your small groups to discuss and to study and to pray together, let us hold that call to ancestor work in our hearts in the coming days. And may God bless you, ancestor. May God bless all of us as we seek to do this faithful work together. Amen.